to today. So with thanks from financing from Stonehenge Therapeutic Community, we have organized a 3-part training series and to provide some core knowledge and practice guidelines for service providers. And I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Nick Boyce from the Ontario Harm Reduction Network and Janet Stevenson from the neighborhood group at St. Stephen's House. They were both very helpful in creating the content for these sessions. So today, our first session is methamphetamine's effects on the minds and the body, and our presenter is Dr. Tim Guimond. It is the first of 3 sessions. The second session is next Wednesday, same time, and it's focusing on effectively supporting people who are experiencing crystal meth psychosis. Sandra Kazazik from the All Saints Community Center in Toronto is going to speak about crisis response and de-escalation with some applied and practical things to do to help in those situations. And then the last session is on December 9th. We're focusing on promising practices. We have speakers from the neighborhood group at St. Stephen's House and the Toronto Drop-In Network who will share how they include people who use meth in all their service decisions. And then we'll also have Gail Parker, who's a nurse practitioner working at the Working Center, talk about information on stimulant safe supply. So those are the 3 sessions, and we're starting today. By the way, we are recording the sessions. If you are someone who doesn't like to take notes, the session will be up on the Drug Strategy website in a little while, and it will be available there for you to look at later. So I just want to share what our agenda is for today. What we're going to do initially is invite you all into a breakout room so you can actually get to meet some of the people who are attending the session and have an opportunity just to make this a little bit human. We're going to pretend you're sitting in a conference room and you're sat around a table, and you'll have the opportunity to meet people around that table. You're going to go back to that breakout room at least 2 more times, once with Dr. Guimond in an exercise, and then again at the end as a wrap up for our session. So after the breakout room, then you'll be having the fun of listening to Dr. Guimond. That's really what you came for. So that'll be what we'll focus on. And that'll be followed by a question and answer period. We've given a fairly long time for that. So hopefully we'll get to as many questions as we can. And then at the end of all that, we'll just close again with that final breakout room. We're just going to ask you to work with us on Zoom. So if you can send comments and questions via the chat, that is being monitored, and we'll be able to respond to that. And also just knowing that your mic is likely to be muted throughout the session just to keep down any background noise. So what I'm going to do is ask Erin, who is being our wizard on making all things happen for us today, if she can just send you off into a breakout room. If you can please introduce yourself, share how your work is connected with people who are using meth, and plan to have probably around 6 minutes in that space. So having a little bit of time to just say hello to the other people who are in that space.
Shall I not join the breakout room that I was assigned to?
I didn't join either, just so.
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to join, Tim.
Was there an email with the breakout rooms?
There was an invite, actually. There should have been an invite so you're welcome to hang out with us if you're okay with that.
Okay, sorry about that.
Bev, I know that on my screen, because I have 2 computers up, we're at the bottom of Zoom where it normally says share screen.
Yeah.
It also has one now that says you can join breakout rooms from here, like 2 to the right of that. I don't know if that showed up for you.
It did not. Oh, there it is. There's one that just popped in.
Okay.
Alrighty, thanks so much, whoever sent that.
See you later.
Wow, it's a massive undertaking. I'm looking at all the people here.
I'm trying not to look at all the people. So you know, I'm sitting in my living room with 2 cats, as far as I'm concerned. This is the you know, the weird reality we can all live in.
I'm gonna actually, speaking of which, I'm gonna close my door. So my dog likes to poke his head in at very bad times. So I'm just gonna make sure it's shut as best as I can, although he's pretty sneaky. My husband is busy trying to teach him go to bed because right now it turns out he's a rescue. We've just gotten him. And where he likes to sleep is between my head and Elliot's head. Like he's a little dog, so he just like cuddles right up in there.
Very
and then when
cute.
he gets bored, he licks your nose in the middle of the night, which has not been good for our sleep.
I can imagine, and it could be Elliot, so who knows, right? Like this is complicated. So where did you rescue him from?
We went with CPAWS. We put an application in a year ago. Then they said we never get small dogs because of my husband's disability. He can't handle the pull of a large dog through his arms. And so they said, oh, well, we never get small dogs. So we just gave up on it. And then 2 weeks ago, they sent an email saying, we have a small dog if you want him. Yes. So he's come from northern Manitoba to us.
Wow. Wow. And is he kind of cute?
He's so adorable. He looks just like a little puffball. He's
oh, nice.
And when we yesterday in the muddy puddles, he was like white on top and black on the bottom. So he looks like an Oreo cookie. It's been opened up.
Oh, so funny.
So we've been doing lots of bath time with him to clean up post.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of dirty towels sitting around in your hallway. I can see it already.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what his story is, or you just know that he was?
We just know that he was what do you call it? He was a owner surrender is what they said, and that's all we know. He doesn't have any. It seems like he's never been vaccinated because we gave him his first vaccines. He didn't like that very much. He hasn't been neutered. He has that coming up, poor guy. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I don't know how much he's going to like you, Tim, if you're sticking needles into him and putting them under the knife.
I know. I'm not very good. The breakout meet. So just for Laura Phalance, you know that we're starting off today with some breakout rooms so you can introduce. There's about 159 people, and it allows people to kind of meet like 6, 7, 10 people, I guess, that are in their local neighborhood. So we're just going to start with that, and then rejoin to start the crystal meth talk in a few minutes after that.
Yep. And so just to note as well, anyone who's like I've ported everyone into a breakout room. However, it's up to them on their end to actually say like, yes, bring me to the breakout room. Right. And so if they don't, they'll just sit in this main meeting. And anyone who is still joining, I've been admitting them and then just throwing them into a random breakout room. So
thank you. And Erin, when everybody leaves their breakout room, like it'll be obvious because people will start flooding back in, or how will we know?
Yeah, so as soon as you'd like to close the rooms, I can do that. Everyone will have about a minute to wrap up conversations. Okay. And so then within that minute, they can press go back to the main meeting. They'll come back to the main meeting, and then or if they don't, within a minute, they'll come back anyways.
So we were going to give people about 6 minutes. So it's probably there already, right? Do you think people have had time? How many people are in a room?
There's about like 5 to 8 people in each room. And there's about 38 participants who aren't in a breakout room, like meaning they just never clicked that button to be ported into a breakout room.
Okay, well, let's just bring people back.
Okay.
Or give them their 1 minute warning.
Yeah. I will close all the rooms now and it'll start the minute countdown.
I can keep talking a little bit for people to test their audio.
Yeah, that would be great because some people are saying they can't hear.
Yeah, I don't know whether I could sing the alphabet song. That's a favorite for people. Although you might not like my singing. So this is your audio test. Hopefully on the bottom left corner of your Zoom, you can use the join audio or problem solved as a little arrow to the left of it that often brings up a menu that includes the option to test your audio. test speaker and microphone, it's called, and I have successfully used that several times. It's especially helpful if it turns out you have like a computer that has different options for your audio. I have a microphone that sometimes my computer likes to turn into a speaker, which doesn't do very much. So.
Okay, Erin, do we have people back?
Yep, there are 207 participants.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I hope that was a nice chance to actually get a chance to meet some people and to find out what you have in common. And one of the things you have in common was you joined in today because you wanted to hear Dr. Guimond speak on the impacts that methamphetamine has on mind and body. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tim Guimond. He is a psychiatrist and a biostatistician. He provides clinical services to people with concurrent disorders, and he also teaches medical students, residents, and students in other health disciplines about substance use treatments that include motivational interviewing, dialectical behavior therapy, community reinforcement approach, and medication options. Tim's educational background includes medical school at Johns Hopkins University, a psychiatric residency at the University of Toronto, a Master's of Science in Statistics, and a PhD in Biostats from the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. And Tim submitted a little bit of what his research was about. I'm not going to tell you because partly it might scare you, and secondly, I can't pronounce it. So you're not going to know about that. And if you want to know, you'll have to ask him directly. And it is really my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Guimond. I've heard him in previous trainings, and I know you're really going to enjoy this opportunity to learn from him and his experience and his expertise. So take it away, Tim.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. This is very exciting to do. I've done a couple of Zoom things. This is by far the largest, so hopefully we do not have too many hiccups. We've tried to make this interactive. I just need permission to share my screen, I think from Erin, and then I'll be able to share slides. But today, as you said, I work both clinically, and the research I do is highly statistical in nature. But I have a particular interest in my clinical work in substance use, in harm reduction, and that's sort of my passions, I'd say. So this has been an fantastic opportunity. Clinically, recently, I have been asked to do a lot of work with methamphetamine. And so this particular topic has been kind of important to me. Hopefully now you can see the title screen. I'm seeing a nod from Adrian, so I'm going to take it that hopefully everyone else can too, and that you're hearing me okay. And I'm going to go through. I believe Erin is monitoring the chat, and some of our interactive things are going to be through polls, and they're also going through chats. So sometimes you'll get polls that will pop up and we'll ask you just to answer. We'll give 30 seconds to get answers together, and they'll make some decisions. This will be like choose your own adventure. For those of you who grew up in my era, there were these books where you would decide what paragraph you were reading next as you decided how the character was going to act. So here we go. We're still good. You can see my next overview slide. This is today. We've done our introduction. The main topics I have is I also love to choose your own adventure books, so I'm glad Libby approves. So there's the science about the drug. Then we're going to talk about some clinical issues that include issues around psychosis. We can talk, if we like, about sex. This is often a bigger concern in the gay community, but there may also with sex trade. And so I'll let you, that's part of the adventure. You can choose or choose to skip when we get to it. We're going to talk about some harm reduction strategies. We have a case study to discuss with some video clips from the A&E intervention. I don't particularly like the TV show or the intervention, but they have some excellent points that can be made by seeing someone who actually is struggling with meth. And then we'll have some discussion after that. That'll be when we have a second breakout room again. Then we'll come back. I'll discuss some of what we know about treatments. The options are really slim. I'll warn you about that now, but let you know what we have found in terms of the science supports, in terms of helping people when they decide they want to stop or reduce. And then we will have a final breakout room where I believe we're polling you about the next plans and how you found today, and just a wrap up. So that's the plan for today, but that actually launches us into our poll number 1. So for me to kind of know which topic you'd like me to spend most time on and which topics you want me to roast through, I'm hoping you can tell us the one you want to hear the most about. So the science, the clinical issues, the case study, or the treatments. So go ahead and vote in the poll, and we'll know in a minute how your colleagues have voted. Someone who wants to vote for them all, unfortunately. I will cover all of them. It's just an issue of how much depth we get of each one. We already took what was going to be 1 hour. We expanded it to an hour and a half to make sure to cram more material in. And so hopefully I won't leave you wanting too much more at the end.
I'll give it another like 10 seconds and then
Okay,
wrap it up.
10. Now, for those of you that are voting in the chat, you should hopefully get a poll that pops up on your screen. If not, our apologies. It means that we don't really know. It's our first time using, my first time using these polls. So. There we go. Well, it's okay. So looks like the majority of people, number 2, the clinical issues was the most voted for. Next after that is the science, the case study. So I'll try to see if there's parts we can kind of skip through, and the treatments is kind of second to last there. So that's great. Thank you so much. So let me move us through on the science then. There we go. So here we go. This part of the adventure. Sorry, I'm just having to get my, I have something in the way of the forward button on my screen. I just need to move it so I can do this more easily. So the science of amphetamine. So one of the things to keep in mind is that methamphetamine, other drugs, often the thing they do in our body mimics something that naturally occurs in our body. And in the case of methamphetamine, it naturally mimics dopamine. And so the dopamine here is on the left. You can see Ritalin, the shape of Ritalin, and the shape of cocaine. And you can see that end with the ring looks like dopamine. It turns out biochemistry, or the science of looking at chemistry as it's active in biological systems, is a lot about the shape. For a drug to be active, it has to have the same shape as something in your body. And drugs are essentially fooling our bodies by having us respond to a drug in the same way that we would have responded to a natural chemical. It turns out that dopamine also, though, is similar to other drugs in our brain, serotonin. Our body takes tryptophan and converts it to a number of different neurotransmitters that are used. This is why many of those drugs that are stimulants, the things that keep people awake, that give people energy, that help them focus more, these sorts of drugs have a very similar look. So in this slide, you can see the picture on the right is the look of amphetamine in a kind of stick and ball diagram version. Methamphetamine is on the left. But ecstasy and the kind of different forms that people get when they buy ecstasy, which can be MDMA, MDEA, or MDA, because we don't generally have a very controlled market for these things. Sometimes people call those things Molly. They are also very similar, as you can see. The thing that changes is the right-hand side of that molecule. Why is that important? So this drug, methamphetamine, it appeared as a recreational drug in the early 1940s. It also had some medical applications early on. It was used in war times to help pilots stay awake for long flights. The half-life, that is how long, when you take a dose, how long it is till your liver can clear out half of it from your body, between your liver and your kidneys in some cases. But in this case, it's liver. The half-life is 12 hours. This is very long. Amphetamine, which was kind of around before then, was much shorter, more like 2 hours. So this means that when people use methamphetamine, its effects can last longer. Now, the next bit is that what it causes is this, what we call CNS stimulation. So it's like, it's something that wakes people up, makes them alert, depresses their appetite, things like this. The other thing about methamphetamine is it's two isomers. It's like your two hands. They look similar, 5 fingers, a palm, a back of your hand. But we know they're different when you have 2 right-handed gloves. You can't fit both hands in a right-handed glove. And so similarly, methamphetamine has a mirror image, and they aren't exactly the same, and they don't fit exactly the same in the brain. They both do similar things. They both make people feel energized, but turns out one of them is more potent than the other. This is relevant because as control for the drugs that are used to make methamphetamine change, whether or not you have a mixture of both hands, just one hand or just the other hand, can change the potency for a very similar weight of drug. And so this is something that I discovered actually early on when we didn't understand this, when people commented that the drug was getting stronger, and it didn't make any sense to those of us who understood the science at that point until we learned this fact. And then suddenly that experience that people had of a changing drug was linked to this idea of how they were manufacturing it had changed as certain precursors were made illegal. Of course, I put the little kind of tongue in cheek here. It's not like you can check a label to figure out what you've got. And so that means anytime you get a drug, you don't really know what exactly is in there, and you don't know which version of it or combination you might have. So as I said, this is something that's a stimulant. Sometimes we refer to that as a sympathomimetic because it's mimicking the sympathetic system, your fight or flight, your turning on attention, that sort of thing. This causes pre-symptomatic release of dopamine and norepinephrine and some direct postsynaptic catecholamine receptor stimulation. That all sounds very fancy. To make this more understandable, I have a reward circuit video, which I am now going to stop sharing screen on one and try on the other. So if you'll just give me one moment. And I just need to also share my sound so that it'll come out hopefully clearly. And if Adrian, if you don't just mind nodding at me if it's coming out clearly when I start it.
Deep within the brain is a set of structures called the limbic system. The limbic system contains the brain's reward circuit or pathway. The reward circuit links together a number of brain structures that control and regulate our ability to feel pleasure. Feeling pleasure motivates us to repeat behaviors. When the reward circuit is activated, each individual cell in the circuit relays electrical and chemical signals. The small gap between the sending and receiving cells is called the synapse. In the reward circuit, dopamine neurons release the neurotransmitter dopamine. The released dopamine molecules travel across the synapse and link up with proteins called dopamine receptors on the surface of the receiving cell. When dopamine binds to the exterior of the dopamine receptor, this causes proteins attached to the interior part of the receptors to carry the signal onward within the cell. Some dopamine molecules re-enter the sending cell via dopamine transporters and can be re-released. When a reward is encountered, the presynaptic cell releases a larger amount of dopamine in a sudden burst. Dopamine transporters will then quickly remove the excess. Dopamine surges in response to natural rewards help the brain learn and adapt to a complex world. However, drugs are able to hijack this process, contributing to unhealthy behaviors and consequences. When someone first uses methamphetamine, the drug quickly enters the brain. At low doses, meth blocks the re-entry of dopamine into the presynaptic cell, just like cocaine does. But unlike cocaine, higher doses of meth can increase the release of dopamine from the cell, leading to much more dopamine in the synapse, where it becomes trapped since meth prevents the transporters from removing it. Because so much dopamine remains in the synapse for such long periods of time, the postsynaptic cell is activated to dangerously high levels, causing the user to experience powerful feelings of euphoria, making meth incredibly addictive.
Tim, you're muted.
Sorry, I muted in two places because I had an echo at my end. I was playing this on two computers, so my apologies. So to say, if you have any questions about that, please feel free to put some questions in the chat, and we'll kind of keep monitoring if there's some things. But some things from the NIH or NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, funded by the NIH, can be a little bit exaggerated at times. So, and wanting to kind of up the fear portion. But the point that they're making is quite accurate, that the dopamine that comes in normally is being released, that what methamphetamine does is actually it confuses the system to have more dopamine released and to move some of the dopamine that is free in the nerve to get pushed on. So I'm just going to forward a slide here. Someone's asking about does the euphoria make it addictive? It certainly, what I'm going to talk a little bit about dopamine is that we think dopamine, sometimes people talk about the reward pathway, right? But this reward idea, the dopamine's role in it is for something called salience. It's the idea that something stands out from the background. So when you look at a black and white photo, or there used to be these images where you had to kind of relax your eyes and look behind the image, and suddenly an image would come out in 3D from it. In those situations, when something suddenly comes out of like what seems like fog that you can now see it distinctly, dopamine is firing to help you identify that this thing that's standing out is separate from the background. That sort of thing is, of course, very important for reward. If you do something and someone gives you a reward because of it, you want to notice and put together what was it that happened that earned me this reward, right? This is how so salience is a component, a necessary component for reward systems to work. And in this situation, that's sort of what dopamine with methamphetamine, by causing all this extra dopamine release, is confusing our brain system to be able to recognize what's important, what's not. So here, this is just showing cocaine, and cocaine would stop the reuptake and keep things there, but methamphetamine, in addition, causes more release. And that just increases the level of dopamine to levels that were not seen with cocaine and not seen with amphetamine. It also causes those same transporters, which were meant to bring the dopamine back into the first cell, to start working in reverse and start spitting out all the extra. Then once you have this extra dopamine, it normally would if it goes beyond this synapse and it floated away, MAO, the monoamine oxidase, would break it down for your body to use it for something else. But methamphetamine has also blocked that. So now it doesn't get broken down as much. So these are like all the several steps that are happening. In addition to that, is that the meth has affected two other major systems. And those systems cause oxidative stress. So, you know, when everyone tells you to eat lots of berries and that those are antioxidants, it's that there's these free radical systems that cause inflammation, and those help fight inflammation. But methamphetamine is inducing inflammation in the brain at the mitochondria, which is the system that makes new proteins and reads your DNA to make the proteins you need within a cell. It's aggravating it. It's causing DNA breaks. It is causing, which can be seen as like actual chromosomal differences. And so that those radical oxygen species are being created. That's also triggering the microglia. The meth molecules itself are also binding onto microglia. Microglia are a cell in your brain that's like the garbage collector. So you have an immune response throughout your body. If there's some virus around and you've managed to kill it, it's going to go collect those things that ought not to be there, those viral particles, bacteria, cells of your own body that have died. It's going to collect them up, eat them, and break them down. Well, meth is binding to one of its receptors and turning that into high gear. So it's busy trying to get all the inflammation response to respond. So it's increasing the inflammation in your brain. Now, these are newer understandings we have about how meth works. But here's the thing. Clinically, they haven't helped us figure out what to do differently. We don't have any new drugs to necessarily address those things yet. And we don't necessarily understand what's the impact of those things. Because if we look at long-term changes in people's brains, while we might see them on scans, we don't know whether or not if you stop using, will all of it correct, only some of it correct. There's some evidence that some of these things might last for a longer time, but we haven't had really long-term studies to understand how much they might be permanent changes, which sort of leads, like someone's question in the chat was about psychosis, like what happens in psychosis. So psychosis, when we want to treat psychosis, we use anti-dopamine drugs. And so in fact, getting excess dopamine out is often used in models to mimic schizophrenia. And so the fact that if you take methamphetamine for a long period of time, you can eventually get to the point where you have psychotic symptoms. And I'll talk to that more in the clinical section and kind of answer a little bit there about when that happens. Typically, once it happens for you, it happens as soon as you get high. You might be more distracted by the good feeling of being high that you're not talking to people about it until later on. And so it may become only apparent to others what's happening after they've come off of their peak. And now they're starting to describe the experiences they're having. But they're probably still having sort of shifted experiences from early on, from a peak in the dopamine release, although the total burden of dopamine being there for a long time can happen with a bit of delay. Why do some people experience psychosis and some don't when using meth? That's an excellent question that actually I don't think have any good understanding yet of. It is very personal, we see. I've seen people who've used incredibly high amounts and never developed psychosis, and some people who've gone over a little threshold and any amount after that point, no matter how small, seems to re-prompt it. We don't know too, there's the kind of chicken and egg problem here where many people might develop psychotic illnesses in their 20s, which is about the same time people might start using drugs sometimes, although some people use younger. And so sometimes we don't know whether the methamphetamine they have used has literally caused a psychosis, or if it's uncovered and made it easier for them to develop a problem that they were really at risk to have. And so sometimes it's not clear whether this was, like let's say you have weak knees and you decide to go run a marathon, and that's how you discover you have weak knees. And then your cartilage gives out and now you need a knee replacement much earlier. We wouldn't, if you had never chosen to become a marathon runner, it might not have been discovered, kind of thing. We don't really yet have a complete understanding of either the impacts of substances at times for many of these things in the long term. We also don't have great understanding of a lot of the mental health. Why do some of these mental health things happen? Those are questions that the science is still being discovered, I'd say. I am realizing the one thing I don't have on my screen is a clock. So I'm just trying to move myself forward a little bit faster here to keep us on track. So the thing about methamphetamine is you can use it many, many different ways. It is versatile in this way, because it can easily dissolve in liquids. It means it can be injected. It means when you snort it, it gets absorbed. It also happens to go across those membranes. So snorting this drug works. Similarly, it's a drug that if you heat it, it will vaporize and people can smoke it. They can inhale the vapor from heating it. It doesn't burn and get destroyed by heat at a temperature of a butane lighter. And it also is able to vaporize, which makes it a smokable drug. It's also possible because we don't really have anything in our GI tract, nothing in our stomach or our intestines that's going to deactivate methamphetamine. So swallowing it is about, no, not quite true. Nothing is. There's a bit of deactivation, but a fair amount when you swallow the pill is still available, gets into your bloodstream. So there are many drugs we know where you have to do something special in order to get it, to take it in different ways. You know, cocaine cannot be smoked, but if you try convert it into crack cocaine, into its alternate form, its base form, it can now be smoked, but it can't be injected. But you could take the crack and you can put an acid like citric acid, vitamin C, and you can convert it back to the cocaine. Now you can dissolve it so you can inject it. So some drugs need these conversions in order to be able to take them different ways. This is one that just methamphetamine as its own can be used in many different ways, which also means that people might adapt how they use to a form that's more likely to cause dependence. So to kind of think about the dependence question that was asked earlier, one of the key things that's important is how much of a dose can you take at a time? And how quickly can it take its effect? The faster it takes an effect, the more likely you might end up dependent on it. There are other personal things that make a difference in each individual's body about whether or not they are prone to get dependence. But these are parts of how you take it. If you ingest it, it's a slower onset than if you snort it. It's a bit faster, but you can't get quite as much into your body at the same time. If you smoke it, it's incredibly fast, probably faster than injecting, but with injecting, you could get more in your body. So you can see here, there's these things that can affect how much you get in and how quickly, that can affect whether or not you're at risk to become dependent. It's also important to keep in mind that I have had a very hard time tracking down this research, but there was one of my colleagues, Wayne Skinner, a mentor of mine early on from KMH, who used to show this slide that explained that different drugs have a different rate of being dependency forming. And the way they looked at it is they said, how many people in the last year used it all and what proportion of them ended up dependent? Cigarette smokes, 90% of people who smoked a cigarette some point last year are using it in a dependent form. It is the most highly addictive drug that we had to have in our marketplace. And then things like methamphetamine and heroin, opiates might be next higher. That number, though, is still about 40% of people who use at all last year have dependence, which means there's 60% of people out there who are using on an occasional basis or one-off basis who do not become dependent on it. So it's good to keep that in mind. The people who come forward and tell us about their use, especially for a drug that's been sort of demonized as much as methamphetamine has in a lot of public spheres, means that people who might be using and not having problems may be less likely to tell us about their use. The problems, of course, from illegal drugs, how they're made, are huge because we don't know what kind of contaminants might be in there from the way the drugs are made. And so those cause people health problems too. There we go. Now to my next poll. So for you, in the community of people you see here using meth, what is the most common method they're using to use drugs? And we'll give this maybe another 15 seconds. And 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're going to close our poll. And now we'll see the smoking. So this is very interesting. So this has changed historically over time. When meth first was coming more popular around the time of ecstasy in the 1980s, when it was first introduced, it was probably snorted a lot. In the 1980s, people were ingesting it in pills, and then they started snorting it. In the gay community, smoking was the most common, and then people would potentially move to injecting. So injecting is a very close second here. And of course, snorting. Most people are no longer ingesting the drug, which is sort of fascinating. The reason why I bring this up and I ask about it is because I have had some success for people who making a change to how they use the drug has impacted how much of a dose they get. So moving to ingesting or moving to snorting as another method can sometimes reduce the amount they're using. Of course, and that might help people who are having psychotic symptoms to have less psychosis with it and to kind of make some other changes. Often we say in psychotherapy, any change you make begins forming in your mind that another change is possible. So it opens a possibility for people. So I'm going to skip these kind of musings. These are just my ideas. I think I've gotten to many of them already. We have very few treatment options to offer you. I worry about the kind of panic sense that sometimes people get about crystal with all the stuff that came out the first time with all the meth mouth, that those fear-based messages kind of drove people from admitting their use, and I think served as a bit of a problem for us connecting with people and helping them when they needed help, or just providing the harm reduction services, or even just respecting that some people are using without problems. The other key thing here is that unlike opiates, meth your use does not seem to be pushed by withdrawal. In opiates, the withdrawal is so terrible. You want to avoid withdrawal. You use so you don't go through withdrawal. And there are a small number of people who get using a high enough amount where this drives their use, but it's kind of lower. And the bad news, like I said already, the science hasn't really completely helped us here. So we're learning more about that neuroinflammation, but it hasn't helped us guide our ways. We have a syringe exchange. Yeah. So it's a very good point. Someone's raising that, you know, if you have a service like a syringe exchange, you're mostly going to hear from the people who are injecting, right? And so when we start offering pipes to people, it can open up us realizing a larger group of users that might need our help. It's a good question. Why does cocaine maybe have less? This is just, I had this little slide here. If we talked about the idea of salience here, you might see the shoreline and the water. If you look with if you tilt your head, you might be able to see a woman lying down with a boy or a girl in front of her that are holding their hands like in prayer. This is an idea of salience that sometimes you might not see it initially, but if you bring your attention, the trees are her eyes here, eye and eyebrows, her mouth, nose. So maybe you're able to see that now. And it's just this idea that sometimes when things are very subtle, salience is that thing that makes it stand out. Personally, this is not a scientific claim I'm making right now, but personally, I am beginning to wonder if, because dopamine changes salience, when I hear people who develop psychotic symptoms, that sometimes it's about misidentifying what's important, and minor things seem way more important to a person, and they start constructing beliefs around those minor things in their environment. And they seem like very subtle signs for me initially when I start noticing that someone is going down a path where I'm likely to see more psychotic symptoms. In the chat, some people have said like there's demographics differences, but who uses cocaine? Crystal meth is very inexpensive to make, and that probably changes who sees it. Okay, so now I'm going to go through some of the clinical issues. One of the key problems from frequent use is obviously dependence, like we're saying, that happens for people, and that's the sort of urge to use, uncontrolled use despite negative consequences. Also, though, people start having these ADHD-like presentations. So there are certainly some people who have ADHD who find that stimulant drugs help them focus, be more organized, be less chaotic, and more calm in situations. But there's also the situation that people who use methamphetamine for long periods of time may find themselves with an ADHD-like difficulties when they're not using. So they start having trouble focusing and concentrating on things. And that's some of the research has been showing that is a problem that may actually be improved upon with longer periods of people being not using. The other is, of course, the psychosis we've talked about, and we'll talk about that a bit later in more detail. Some risks that can happen just even for a first use are like overdose problems. So there's overdoses that actually happen from this drug. So because it is like a fight or flight type thing, it makes your heart go fast. So tachycardia just means fast heart rate. It can increase your blood pressure because you've got your heart beating faster. I think someone's unmuted right now because I'm just hearing there's a little sniffling. There's an intracranial hemorrhage can happen. That's if you bleed into your brain because the pressure gets high. And if it's that high with a strong heartbeat for a long time, it can rupture a vessel and you can have a stroke. People have also had seizures when they are in very, very high doses. and people can have heart arrhythmias. Some people, if their heart's going that fast for that long, they might have something that it triggers them into a strange heartbeat. And people can get overheated, hypertension, depending on the setting someone is in, this may be more or less a problem. So this was more of a problem when people were using this in dance situations, maybe in sexualized situations, they're getting overheated and they're maybe not able to get out of the situation to cool themselves down. For people using in sexual situations, it can stop, it can cause erectile dysfunction. So people may also start using drugs to offset that problem, which sometimes there's some combinations between these drugs. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is that overdoses on methamphetamine now have also been contaminated where there's fentanyl contamination in the drugs. And so there have been opiate overdoses with people who've used methamphetamine. They didn't mean to or want to have any opiate in their supply, but we think that there may be situations somewhere in the chain of how drugs are distributed where a small amount of fentanyl might get into it. And if it's concentrated in one person's batch, they, as a person who maybe never uses opiates, gets exposed to any amount of opiate might be really dangerous for them. So we've seen some opiate deaths here in Toronto. I'm not sure if that's also been true in your area, but I don't see why it wouldn't be a possible risk, and perhaps it's happened there too. Okay, someone from Kitchener ER is telling us that they've seen that too. It's a common event. So this is, this is a frightening thing. It also means that even for our methamphetamine using population, we might want to encourage them to have fentanyl, or to understand about fentanyl and to have a naloxone kit and know how to respond to that and how to recognize when an opiate overdose is happening. I just started my computer froze for a second. So I'd like to now do what I call a chat brainstorm. So I'd like you all in the chat. I'm just going to look at some of the questions now to make sure I don't miss anything. And now we're going to talk a little bit about psychosis. And we're going to start that with what's some of the unusual things that you have heard from people where you thought, like, I'm not sure if that's true or it's clearly not true, that you've heard from someone who's using meth that kind of just made you kind of think, I don't know, could that be true? So if you want to like type something in there, and we'll just gonna give a minute or two for this. Okay, I'm gonna start reading some of them out for those who started. Conspiracy theories in general, I've definitely heard those. Frequent stories of being followed by secret agencies. I have seen that. I had a guy who was telling me there was a white van outside of his apartment. He was sure that the FBI and the KGB were working together and monitoring him. People following me in the trees. Feelings of bugs crawling under the skin. This is a kind of problem that's a kinesthetic hallucination. People will often start as being itchy, and then if it intensifies, they'll feel like it's bugs crawling on their skin. If it gets really bad, people will actually try to scratch them out. And so sometimes you'll find people who, when it's really bad, they'll have that sort of wounds that they've self-inflicted trying to get the bugs out. Paranoia and police and neighbors plotting to cause harm. I also think that sometimes people have their experiences so that maybe they come into conflict with the police before. And so it's not that it's completely with no basis. They are concerned. They're doing something that they're worried that the police might, but then it builds into something more complex. Being attacked, hearing voices. So those hallucinations, hearing something that's not there or seeing something that's not there. Meth coming out of the floor. Being both God and Satan. So yeah, those are delusional beliefs about self that can happen. I was told that she was positive for meth because her sexual partner uses meth, but not her. Yeah, that's an interesting one where you're like, so yeah, there is no kind of by touch way to get meth into somebody. Although people will sometimes give other people meth in what they're knowingly, or sometimes I've heard of situations where someone's been unknowingly been given meth. Neighbors spying on them. So you can see lots of the surveillance stuff that happens. One thing that I had heard before and is things about people around their computers and technology, like monitoring through those things. I've seen people actually dismantle their entire computer systems, tablets, phones, take them apart, looking for that extra chip that's monitoring them. I've seen those sorts of things. I'm not sure if that's things. Firm belief that items belong to them, the bike that belongs to the police officer, right? Eating formed scabs to get old meth. That's an unusual one I have not seen before. Feels like their face is blistering. So more of those kinesthetic hallucinations, like feeling something's happening that maybe we can't see. The need to clean or OCD about very specific things. That I have also seen people will get very focused on something and get very compulsive about it. So even that person who I talked about taking his computer apart, or the people I know who've described that, it is often in this very repetitive and detail-oriented way. Okay, so delusional narratives, I'm gonna like let that kind of go a little bit there. I'm not gonna talk about a way to think about what some of those problems are, just a language for it. So part of it here, this idea is there's hallucinations, which could be visual, something someone sees that you don't. For schizophrenia, those are very unusual. Visual hallucinations tend to happen by biological causes, people who might get ill. If you're sick in the hospital with a fever and you start seeing something, that's called a delirium. It's not an unusual situation from something that we think of as very medical, biologically caused. And we think of drugs as being able to cause this. So visual hallucinations are possible. They're still pretty uncommon, I'd say, for crystal meth, amongst other things, but they happen. They're kind of at the severe end of things. Then you have tactile ones we've talked about before, the feeling, the kinesthetic hallucinations, and the auditory. The auditory are often common. Again, they tend to happen more severe. We often talk if you hear more than one voice, that's more severe than just hearing one voice. If a running commentary, that's another thing. People who are talking about you and commenting on your behavior is worse than someone you're actually able to have a conversation with. Thought content is about these bizarre delusions. So some of those things we said, like you have a belief, but it seems unusual. You can have non-bizarre and bizarre, and I'll give you an example in a second of that. And then there's some ideas of thought process. That's how is someone's thinking changed by this. The reason I think about that is to be able to tell when it's worse, when it's early, and when it's later. So I'm just going to go through them now in that kind of sequence. An illusion, this is kind of an illusion. An illusion is something where there's something there, but you're misinterpreting exactly what it is. In this situation, you could see just these colored banners and ribbons, or you can see two skulls on either side, three faces, one facing us, one looking to the left, one looking to the right. They're there, they're harder to see. When you just wake up in the morning or you're just falling asleep and you've seen a curtain and you thought there was a person there, that's called hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucinations. There's something there in the there is an actual stimulus, the visual sight of the curtain, but you're misinterpreting it. That's an illusion. A hallucination is when it moves to you see something and there's nothing there at all. So if someone's pointing something on the floor and they're saying there's meth there and there is something, but it's dust or it's like it's a stain and they're misinterpreting it, that'd be more of an illusion. And that's an earlier thing than the later ones, which are more concerning when it's just there's nothing prompting it and you're seeing something. The other thing about this idea of the thought content is that things start subtle. So it might be a belief that sounds plausible, right? Maybe they went on a date with Madonna when they were younger. Not likely, maybe. It's not impossible. That the fact you went on a date with an alien who has 5 heads, that we're going to call bizarre and think it's not possible. So these are where we start saying like there are bizarre delusions that can't possibly be true. There's things that are plausible but unlikely. There are things that are like, just I don't think it's likely the case. You know, so you start seeing the softer, subtler things first. They also start simple and often develop into more complex. And people will argue with you, like I've said, that strenuously. I try to avoid getting into arguments about things with people. So this is my example of like, you know, non-bizarre delusion. It's plausible that that I have cancer. It's possible the drug dealer is following you because you owe them money. I may not think it's so likely. This was my, like maybe someone famous, like I said, this is represents a kind of delusion where you think you're somebody else, right? Or that the people around you have been replaced. Those are 2 different types of delusions that can happen. They're very unusual and rare when they happen, and they're very concerning if you start hearing that from people. So the early signs, though, are even before those hallucinations or delusions, we can often see these ideas of thought disorder, how someone's thinking. the clarity of the way they answer their questions that you give them, how much their train of thought seems to follow some semblance of organization is very key. So can I just get a time check from someone?
It's almost 2.
Almost 2. Okay, good. So I'm going to wrap up here. This is just represent thought form. This is the idea. It's harder to see thought form. If you've ever seen this cartoon, this boy, Billy, was asked to go put this in the mailbox, and his route to get there was circuitous. He knew he had to be there eventually, but he didn't go there directly. And sometimes you ask a person a question and they eventually answer the question, but the way they get there takes a lot of time. That's circumstantial. They're able to remember they're trying to answer your question, but they're including everything in the answer. Whereas the other way of thinking is called tangential. That's like a pinball machine. You ask them about one thing and suddenly they're bounced off and they're talking about something else. When it's really bad, the ideas are changing between every word and you get something called word salad. That's very extreme, where you can't follow it. So here's some tips. Try not to focus on the actual content. Try to address the emotion. If you end up with an argument, whether it's true or not true, you'll be there for hours. But recognizing that this is upsetting them, it's worrying them, they're angry about it, and what could we do to help you feel better can sometimes move the conversation to an area that's easier to manage. That is easier said than done in many situations. And so distracting people with some other things, food, other things could be very useful. Trying to keep yourself calm and soothing during this can be very useful because, like we talk about in harm reduction, drug set and setting, the drug is there. You can't do anything about it right now. Their mindset is there. You can try to talk to them about to shift their mindset to help them feel better, but the setting can have huge impacts. So having a soothing environment, less stimulation around them. If you're in a very busy drop-in center, having a corner or a room you can go in that's quieter, that might have soothing music, something that brings be safe about it, right? Make sure you're safe in that environment and you have an exit if you need to, but these are things you can think about doing. You want to pause to let them gather their thoughts, but if they have this tangential thing, if you realize they just go to other things because they lose track completely, you might need to nudge them. So you have to make that judgment based on what kind of thought form they've got. People who have more than 5 years of methamphetamine use might be at higher risk of developing a persistent form of psychosis. This is sort of what we've learned from some research. I put a citation down there at the bottom if you want to read about it. Some people believe that the sleep deprivation that happens might be a major factor. So if you can get people to start having some amount of sleep with their runs, that may help them in some ways. Probably there's a point of no return where if you start having severe psychotic symptoms when you use, unless you reduce drastically your use or change how you're using, you're probably going to frequently have that same psychosis when you do use. It is important to try to differentiate those people who might be actually showing that they have schizophrenia, and that at that point might need a psychiatrist who's got some expertise, with concurrent disorders, who understands both the drugs and the mental health stuff to disentangle that. Some very important things for women. While drugs tend to affect men and women very similarly, methamphetamine is a bit of an exception. So mood fluctuations happen and they seem to be accentuated as meth somehow interacts with normal menstrual hormonal fluctuations. In pregnancy, there's additional risks for some pretty severe things. Preeclampsia is high blood pressure. And these numbers are always looking at for meth use versus with opiate use versus in the general population. So you can see placental abruption is the tearing of your placenta from the lining of your uterus. Preterm delivery can happen. And there's things that can affect the nutrients of the babies. There doesn't seem to be fetal anomalies, but the appetite suppressant effects of it means that babies don't grow as quickly. And so pregnant moms who aren't coming for prenatal care may be at more risk. There seems to be some behavioral consequences for kids up to a year of age, at least, that's been found. There's not much studies beyond that, unfortunately. It also appears in breast milk. So someone has a kid, has a relapse, is using, they might want to consider it's likely to take about 48 hours until it's out of breast milk completely. And I'd like to thank Suzanne Turner at McMaster for offering these slides to me to help me with some of that material. So here's my 3. Do you want to hear about sex and meth, or shall we, in the interest of time, move beyond this? So maybe we'll just put that poll up quickly. And end in 10. We'll take it down. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay. That's a strong vote. Okay, I am going to move on to this part then. So, meth and sex. There are reasons people use drugs. This is true across the board. It is useful to think of this functional analysis idea. What's the function for this person to use? Well, it may just be, it feels really good. That's what people use. Now, in some contexts, it's part of the use in certain ways or certain types of sexual acts that where meth is part of a way that people use. But also, I've met many people who have discovered that meth helps suppress some of the shame they feel and guilt that they have when they're engaging in sex, and that might make it easier for them to have sex. So sometimes those things get intertwined. And so frequently it's useful to explore this with people if you have that type of relationship and try to get them help to deal with the impacts of sexual abuse and shame. When we try to help people who want to stop use, who have sex lives intertwined with their methamphetamine use, you may, in fact, may need to have some period where they change their sexual behavior quite drastically. They might have a vacation from sex. They need to not watch the pornography they've been watching if the pornography is also mixed. So you kind of need to understand what's their patterns of use and when does it happen? And is there any places where the meth use isn't happening? Unfortunately, for many people, they can start getting to a point where all their sexual activity involves meth, and it's going to take some time to reprogram and get some new connections of pleasurable sexual activity that don't involve meth. Normally, you want to do that a bit after they've had some sense of accomplishment of being able to get some breaks time from their use. So those are kind of some tips there you can read. I'm going to just move in 1 second on to the next. So those are some minor tips to get you started on it. So now we're going to kind of pivot to the harm reduction kind of things. I'm going to just ask for this chat brainstorm, and I'm going to check my time. So in the chat, if you'd like to write in, what are some harm reduction strategies that you think are important for methamphetamine? Mouthpieces for pipes. Yes, when people burn their lips from a pipe, then you get little blood particles that can get transferred between people. It's a hepatitis vector for hep C and B. Using with someone else, especially in this world where we know there's contaminants in it, having someone to be able to call for help is useful. Change method of use, smoking instead of injecting, moving from smoking to ingestion, drug testing strips and new supplies. Yeah, so making sure people are using new equipment each time. And the ability to test their drugs in advance to see that they have what they think they have, and it doesn't include things they don't want to be having. Hygienic use, keeping devices clean, safe injection practices. Yeah, so teaching people how they can use in safer ways. Decriminalizing, making sure that people aren't suffering all sorts of legal penalties from this on top of whatever problems they would have or not have otherwise. Helping people not share needles, changing people, places, and things, changing up their situation so they might have some more control over what they do when they do. Smoking over being more accessible mental health resources. Yeah, integrating some mental health resources into services where people are using. Alcohol swabs for pipes helps prevent glass burns. Great. Education on how to use properly, providing a safe supply of meth, sleep between runs, safe practices, housing, mental health supports where accessible. So that's a great list. So I'm just going to put a couple of things that I often think about. Harms can happen because of the way we're using. So changing the route of administration or helping people use in the route they are using in safer ways can be useful, right? Sterile syringes, one's own pipe. I've also seen situations where you color code them. You have something on it. So, you know, the blue one with the blue band is mine, the one with the right. So often I saw from a UK harm reduction service, they used to provide people with syringes and cookers that were the same color so that if there were people using together, you didn't get confused about which one was which because they were color matched, that sort of thing. helping people convert to a lower route. We talked about testing drugs. We talked about planning, use, enforcing a sleep rest rule. So I think we have all that. Okay, the case study piece, I'm going to only do a very, so Adrienne, how much time would you like for a final breakout room?
In an ideal world, 5, but I think probably people would rather hear you. I mean, we're choosing our own adventure. If you'd like to take a little more time and we'll choose an adventure that doesn't have a final breakout room, we'll end another way.
Okay, I'm going to play just 2 of the 3 clips I had, because if this was the part that the case study was kind of a minor part, and we might, when we go to that breakout, do it. Yeah, anyway, I think I could do this more quickly. So I'm going to just do that. I'm going to switch right now to my other computer. So if you bear with me, while I just need to get the, so this is from the A&E television program called, sorry, I'm having called Intervention. Interventions have very poor evidence. I'll just say that right off the top. The interventions probably only get 24% of people who are assigned to an intervention into treatment. There's another alternative that's much more aligned with the principles of motivational interviewing, that are positive focused, that work with families to try to help get a loved one to care. That's called CRAFT, the community reinforcement approach, family training. That's what I would propose. But I sometimes find helpful in the intervention videos and watching them is you can see people using, you can see how they look after they use. So you kind of get an idea of what intoxication looks like for those of you who might not have seen this. You can see what withdrawal looks like, because they'll often show people in withdrawal states. You can also see the kind of conflict that often happens in family. It's important to think that people are in families and neighborhoods and communities where they get support. And so seeing that can be very useful. She's been using methamphetamine. She lives in Minnesota. One thing you can listen for her accent, and when is it most prominent? Is it when she's using, when she's sober, when she's right? Hopefully if I play the right clips, you'll notice some of this. She's going to talk a little bit about her situation here to cheer you all up and make you optimistic. So you can see the struggles. Clearly this grandmother wants to do well by her granddaughter, wants to help, but many people come at this with a sort of, if I could just break through the delusion, if I can confront the person. And we know that those sort of approaches don't work. So what I'd like to do is to have us just go to a bit of a breakout here, and maybe we can put together, I don't know, Adrienne, would it help to do both tasks that we need for the breakout, is to have breakout, talk about what?
No, it's good. It's good. Let's just keep your agenda.
Okay. So here's the questions I'm going to suggest. We're going to do back to breakout rooms and just have a bit of discussion of what do you think might make it easier to harder to tell when Sarah was intoxicated or in withdrawal. I didn't show a clip that showed her as much talking after she was clearly having used, but things that you might know, maybe what's brought up here, what works for you when you're in a situation to kind of know someone's so high, it may be not the best time to have a conversation versus a time where this is actually a good time to have a clear conversation. And what do you think Sarah would need right now? Where would you try, what kind of stage of change do you think she's at? And where would you get help in your community? Like if you were thinking about where would I try to get her to next? What would you consider? So when we talk about those things, we'll give you like 7 minutes, 8 minutes in those groups. That'll give us a little bit of time together. We come together to recap some things. Okay. So we're gonna like do this massive, excuse me. I think we've discovered, Adrienne, that me and timing are not the best of friends. I think we've gotten through the major things people really wanted to hear about,
Yeah.
the high points.
I think it's great, and just we won't have a breakout room at the end. It wasn't essential. It was just, and so what we'll just end up with is just when you're ready to wrap, I'll just give a little brief thank you and to everybody, to you, and just let people know there will be an evaluation sent to them, and if they want to have questions included in the next session, they're welcome to put them in there.
Okay, maybe what I'll do is try to bring up like a single slide from the treatment section and let people know that when we distribute the slides, it's possible to distribute all the slides.
Yep.
Yeah, and then say like there's other details about it, but gonna give them the high level, like what we know, because it sounds like the follow-up talks will also talk a bit more about these things, although the med side I'll make sure to mention. We don't know much.
Yeah.
And did I capture the things that you were, remember when we were speaking before and you're saying you wanted to make sure I talked about those sorts of things?
Yeah, no, you've done great. And I always find it interesting. Like, I love how you do these things. First of all, thank you for just making it very real and for just being, your comfort around talking about this just gets conveyed, and destigmatizing and normalizing. And it just I always learn new things. So if and I've heard a lot of these talks, Tim. So if I'm learning new things, I'm sure that other people are too. So that's good.
Okay.
So just thank you.
Thanks.
I love the choose your own adventure, and we're choosing our adventure not to go into a breakout room, which is fine.
Okay.
We have a lot of people, and we have people from the States, which is really interesting.
I am blown away. I'm still sitting here going like, I can't believe there's 180 people that are on this right now.
Yeah, I know.
Did it hit 200 at some
It
point?
did. It did. Yeah, it did. Yep.
Aaron, you'll have to tell us how many people we have retained, although you're probably busy with breakout room stuff. And the people who are kind of not in breakout rooms, you guys doing okay? Any questions you want to ask while you're okay?
This is your private consultation hour.
Exactly.
Go for it.
I'm seeing Olivia and Nicole. I saw you shaking your head, and so hello and welcome. I see you smiling, so I like seeing people's faces. It's like useful. I see lots of people's names.
We had about 220 people.
Wow.
Yeah, I think the highest one was like 222, and now it shows that there's only 60 participants because all the other ones are in breakout rooms, but when we come back, we'll have that full number again.
And according to me, like, I've got it at about 225. So I mean, if it's possible to bring people back like in about a minute or two, it may not be the full time that they thought they were getting, but I'd like to be able to honor that we did tell people we'd wrap at 2:30. So
yeah,
if they've got other things they might need to go to.
Yep, totally fair. Thank you, Asus Neros. I'm probably going to talk very quickly just before we all wrap up about some of the treatment options, which are slim pickings, but what they are. You can hang in. Okay, Aaron, do you want to tell me when we've got people back here?
Everyone should be joining back slowly. So probably within 30 seconds, we should have everyone again.
Okay. I know that was very short for people, so hopefully some discussion happened. Hopefully you got to share a bit of information from or thoughts from what you saw. We are also learning this technology. I think any of you who are on this have been on this end, you may know it's a new way to have to do teaching. Normally I like to use a lot of interaction with people in the audience. And so I'm trying to use the chat that way. I also know that when I've done these, that people are sometimes less likely to unmute themselves and say something when there's this huge crowd here. And normally in a large situation, I would look at someone who looked like they had something to say and I just make you talk and put you on the spot. And that's harder to do here when I can't see you all. So thank you, everyone. I'm just going to like, is there a cycle at which they are in a state to receive information? So that's a very good point. And I think there is a sweet spot that is, so what I have found, I had a guy who came for treatment, and for the first 6 months, all I was doing was praying he would arrive to my office in a state where we could have a useful conversation. And if he came really high, it was very clear when he came back the next time, he didn't remember anything that we talked about. He could answer my questions, so I would do an evaluation, but I couldn't actually have a meaningful conversation with what to do next. And then if he came when he was really in withdrawal, he was so depressed and suicidal that that's what we needed to focus on. We couldn't come up with a plan of how to deal with it. So he either couldn't remember the plan we came up with when he was high, or he could only, so I eventually had him tape because I think there's a sweet spot that is like, just your high has worn off, you've slept and you've woke up, and you're in a prime state for this conversation. And then the withdrawal hangs on and you start feeling irritable and depressed. And now it's not a good spot. I used to get him to tape our sessions and to listen to them when he felt like he was in that good spot. And that's how we finally made our breakthrough. So sometimes it's using creative ways to do that. So I'm just going to show you here that this treatments for, so there's treatments for psychosis. I'm just going to back up a slide here. So I was kind of going through trying to see. The bad news about treatments is that we've tried lots of different medications. Nothing has been shown to be particularly useful, with one exception, and that is for gay and bi men. They did a sub-study of using mirtazapine, which is also sold under the brand name Remeron. I get no money from anybody that does drugs. I just don't take that kind of money. So I'm just telling you what the information I've read in the randomized control trials. They first did a big study using a general population. It did not work for everyone. Then they did an analysis just looking at the gay guys in the sample. And they realized it worked for them. We all thought that's really weird. Why would something work for gay guys and not for anybody else? That doesn't make much sense. So they started recruiting, though, in 2 more trials for men who have sex with men who use crystal, and they gave this Remeron or mirtazapine, and it worked in both other trials. Why? We don't really understand. But if someone's struggling and they're using, it's probably because it's used with sex more often in the gay community. So that might be a consideration for some people, but mostly the things that work is psychotherapies. They have tried all of this list, the slides you'll have in the future you can look at. There's a list of things that have not worked, basically. The things that have worked have been the treatments that are psychotherapy based. It's contingency management, the combination of contingency management and community reinforcement approach. Cognitive behavioral therapy has had some mild improvements for people. And then some mild improvements with behavioral activation, that's getting people active to do things, and physical exercise. So those things have had some positive impacts. I had the citation here from 2014, but I read a paper from 2020 and we're in no different position. I just haven't updated the information at the bottom, but basically we have not learned anything in these 6 years that would bring us to a different sort of option. So that's sort of where we're at. Symptom management, the last thing is that antipsychotics. If you give antipsychotics, it might help people with the psychosis. It may cause them to use more heavily. So we're a little worried. And so if you hear people with their psychosis treatment, they're not really doing anything, a lot of us feel like we're in a pickle. The best way to help people with psychosis is to change the way they're using so that it impacts them by having less overall drug use or not getting them as quickly high. Those are kind of our benefits. They're not huge benefits that I can say to you, but that's my overview. We're at 2:31, so I'm going to stop there. And thank you all for your attention through all of this. And I hope that was helpful for you. And I'll send it back to Adrienne for any housekeeping things that might she wants to say before we're gone, because I know there's 2 more talks that you can sign up to hear.
The only housekeeping is a great big thank you to you, and just thank you for all the expertise. Thank you for making this so engaging. Thank you for trying to find a way to bring 200 people into a Zoom room and make it into one classroom, one gathering spot. So thank you so much. And just if everybody can, I don't know, shake hands or say thank you, however you want to do it, just say thank you to Dr. Guimond. And just there will be an evaluation which will come to everybody who signed up for this. It's an opportunity to give us your feedback. We are doing 2 more sessions. We will take your feedback into account in terms of how we structure the other sessions. And if you have specific questions you'd like to ask our future presenters, you can please put those in the evaluation. So just a huge big thank you to everybody for joining us. Hope I know I learned new things, and I hope you did too. And just thank you, and we hope we see you again next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Adrienne.
Hi, Karen. I'm so glad you were there. How are you?
I'm okay, and you?
Great.
Good.
Great. Thank you for connecting. And we'll have this on. We will have, it is recorded. So if there are other people you want to share it with, they can get it from the website.
Absolutely. No, the team was looking to be a part of this, so that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Tim, do you have a link for the last video you shared? I guess the intervention video?
I do not. It is proprietary. So like I'm not even I probably broke the law by showing it. I bought it because for these sort of educational things, and I always figure if I'm using with little clips from it, no one's coming after me. But I don't actually have I don't have it in, and I tried searching for it, but the A&E website, you have to put in whatever your TV, like, you know, like you'd have to put in, like, for me, it's Rogers. I'd have to sign up with my Rogers. And because it's A&E, I think it means you have to have a US based television, like cable provider to access it.
Hopefully, Stephanie, you're still here to hear that.
What I can do is in the slide set, add the information about it so that if somebody were to go looking, that they might be able to figure out, you know, it's in season 1, the episode number, so they could find it. There's actually, we didn't get a chance to watch it, but there's in 2018, there was a follow-up with the same woman who's now been sober for quite a while and talking about where things are at. So it's kind of a nice way to remind ourselves.
You could have shown us that after the depressing conversation with Grandma.
Yeah, that would have been helpful, right? I great thought. I think I had it before, and then during when I was in the panic of there's not enough time, I did it. Gone.
Yeah.
As anyone else who's hanging around have a question they wanted to ask, because I'm always happy to. Yeah, I did, Jessica, thank you. I did try YouTube. Believe me, I was like searching. But if someone else, you know, whatever, you know, I have a friend that when I try to find something, I can't find it. Then I ask her, and like in 30 seconds, she's like, "Oh, here's a free thing. It's from Russia." Blah blah blah. Right? So I don't know.
This is a great opportunity. If anybody's still here, we're taking our time to leave. So if anybody wants to ask a question, please do.
There were some questions about continuing education credits.
Yeah. Sadly, we don't have any ability to give those.
What is CEU?
Continuing education units, probably, I would think.
I'm going to see if I can find the link they're asking for.
And there's a question around the other trainings. The next week, they're actually on the drug strategy website is the place to register. It's wgdrugstrategy.ca. So if anybody wants to, I can maybe put that in the chat.
I'm just going to post it right now. Is that the right one? Oh, that was just to Cheryl. Sorry, I need to put it to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. And Erin and Olivia, thank you very much for being part of the Choose Your Own Adventure team. I think we got I like this brand. I think we'll have a new brand. All right. Well,
hopefully-
we should probably all carry on to whatever else we have to do. So just a great big thank you, Tim. That was amazing. I really appreciate that we have both this, you're sharing the slides, we have the recording. I imagine there's going to be a lot of uptake on that. And just, thank you so much. It's always great to work with you. So thank you so much.
It's such a pleasure. I wish I had been able to come to the community. It's also been tons of fun when I've been able to visit Guelph. So when this is all said and
But you
done,
know what? If you came, we might kidnap you, because I think like this community, you might never get back home. Our community could so benefit. Like if we were able to have the kind of knowledge and comfort level locally, I think things would be so much better for us. But anyway, it's great to get them vicariously. So thank you.
yeah, and we'll figure out, like, there may be ways. I'm working with some other communities. Like I have a colleague who she started for south of London. There's a small community that's having a huge crystal meth problem. She's joining their RAM on an every other week basis to do some consultation work for them using telemedicine. So we can always think about, like, I'm a little bit saturated right now, but when HQ opens in April, then we can start talking. I'll have the facilities possibly to do stuff like that.
Awesome. Great. Good to know. Thank you very much. And there are a couple of other people maybe heard that too, because not everybody's gone here. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we will be in touch.
Okay.
Have yourself a great afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.